This is how you can beat a chess master both quickly and easily. I dug into the Chess Masters database in order to find the 5 chess traps that work against chess masters based on win percentage. We're going to go through each of these 5 traps so that you can use them in your games. At the end of this video, I will also be showing you the world's hardest chess puzzle. You will have a chance to solve this puzzle and let me know your response in the comment section below. So stick around to the end. Our first trap has a 58% win rate against chess masters. It starts off with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. After bishop to c4, we enter the Italian game. We're launching an attack on this f7 square. Our opponent continues by defending the pawn, which is being attacked by our knight. We go ahead and play knight c3. Simple development move, getting our pieces involved in the action. Bishop to g4 pins the knight, and here we play h3. If the bishop backs up, our opponent is already lost. There is a brilliant move here. Can you find it? That's right, knight e5, brilliant move. We will now look at the 3 most popular responses here. Bishop takes queen, pawn takes knight, and knight takes knight. For starters, the queen is hanging. If bishop takes queen, however, bishop f7 check. Notice the king's mobility is basically limited to 1 square. He goes to e7, and here we have knight d5. This is actually checkmate. Knight check. The knight is blocking all these squares. The bishop is blocking the squares, and you can't take this bishop because the knight is also defending the bishop. Therefore, bishop takes queen is an inaccuracy. You cannot play that. But what about d takes e? Well, here, notice the bishop is hanging. It has no support, and queen just takes. We are attacking the f7 square again, and this game will be over in short order. D takes e will not save our opponent either. So what about knight takes e5? Because after queen takes bishop, the knight wins the bishop, and our opponent is actually up a minor piece. While even here in this situation, we have one final move, queen b5, forking the king and the knight, and we are once again winning this game. It is over. This next trap has a 75% win rate against chess masters. It starts off with e4, e5, knight f3, once again knight c6 defending the pawn. We go ahead and play bishop b5, the Roy Lopez. We are attacking the knight, which is the only defender of this e5 pawn. Our opponent is going to attack our pawn on e4 with knight f6, and we just castle, ignoring the threat. If our opponent takes, we can go ahead and slide the rook out to e1. The most common response here is d5, and this is completely losing because of d3. After the knight moves back, we go ahead and actually win this pawn on e5, and notice that there are just too many threats. The knight is double attacked, and on top of that, there is a discovered check on the king. We will now look at the 3 most common responses to this trap. We have bishop e7, queen d6, and bishop d7. If bishop d7, we just go ahead and play knight c6. Notice that we are checking the king and the queen is in trouble. It is actually game over right here. Therefore, bishop to e7 will at least defend against the discovered check. But here in this situation, knight takes knight, and now after pawn takes, bishop takes back, and we've won the exchange. This is also just game over. It appears in this situation that queen to d6 is the best move because now after the knight takes, the queen is not in trouble. However, we play knight c4, checking the king once again, but also winning the queen with knight d6. This next trap also has a 75% win rate. Here we see e4, e5, knight f3, and in this situation, f5, the Latvian gambit. We go ahead and play knight c3, simple development moves ensue, and we push d4. After pawn takes, we have knight e5, and in this situation, after knight to f6, defending possibilities of queen h5, we have bishop c4. If our opponent takes the bait and plays d5, notice the queen and knight are defending this pawn, and there are only 2 attackers on the pawn. We just go ahead and sacrifice, and in this situation, our opponent is losing no matter what. We are going to look at the 3 most popular options: knight takes, and then also h5, preventing the queen from jumping in. If knight takes, in this situation, we play queen to h5. Notice that after something like g6, we play knight takes, pawn takes back, queen takes, and in this situation, there are just too many threats. At some point, our opponent will just lose too much material, or get checkmated. Of course, our knight on e5 is up for grabs as well. If knight takes, we play pawn takes, and in this situation, after a series of trades, it actually turns out that we are just completely winning. The light square bishop is very strong. This pawn on e5 will be defended with either bishop to f4 or a possible f4 push, and we'll be up 2 pawns and win the game. The most exciting line is h5, preventing the queen from coming to h5, but in this situation, we have bishop g5 check. After the queen moves over, blocking out the check, we play knight takes. Queen takes back, and here we have an absolutely beautiful move, bishop b5, skewering the queen to the king. However, nothing is protecting the bishop, so the queen can take. But if you do take with the queen, we have knight c7, forking the queen to the king. It is game over. You have just won. This next trap has an 83% win rate against chess masters. It starts off with e4, e5, and knight f3. After pawn d6, we play bishop c4, and now we get h6. Here we push d4. Welcome to the zombie king gambit. In this situation, after pawn takes, we sacrifice a second pawn. If our opponent takes, it is game over. Simply just bishop f7, and after the king takes back, we play the brilliant move knight e5. No matter what our opponent plays, it is game over. We will go over the 3 most popular options: d takes e, king e8, and king e6. If d takes e, notice the queen is actually completely hanging. We just take the queen and we've won the game already. If our opponent doesn't take the knight and instead plays king e8, we have queen check on h5. Notice that after pawn takes, we have queen check. The king is forced to e7, and it's just checkmate again on the spot. If our opponent plays king to e6, attempting to attack the knight, we find queen d5. Our opponent moves over to f6, and we play queen f7, sacrificing the knight. Here we have bishop f4, checking the king, forcing the king to take this pawn on e4. After the pawn takes, knight c3, king moves over to d3, and here, the brilliant checkmate, long castles. This is an absolutely gorgeous checkmate. Notice the rook covers the d file, the knight is covering e4, the bishop is covering this dark square diagonal here, and the queen and king block off the light squares. It is game over. This last trap has a 100% win rate against any chess master that's ever played against it. Here we play d4, and we get c5 the old Benoni. We just go ahead and push our pawn, knight f6 attacks the pawn, and we defend with c4. In this situation, we see b5, the Banco Gambit. We can go ahead and take that pawn, but after a6, we go ahead and stop taking pawns, instead developing knight c3. After pawn takes, we play e4. Take a look at this position. Notice that the opponent's knight is attacking e4. If our opponent is to play b4, he would actually force us to vacate the defense of this pawn. But after b4, knight b5, and if the knight takes, it is completely over for black. We play queen e2. Let's look at the 2 most popular options, knight f6 as well as f5. If knight f6, notice that knight d6 is actually checkmate, smothered mate in fact, on the spot. This pawn cannot take back because it is pinned to the queen. In other words, you cannot move this knight, so instead f5, at least keeping the knight stationary. However, we find f3, and in this situation, even though we have created an escape square, after something like knight f6, we can still play knight d6, the pawn is still pinned, and the knight is also covering the escape square on f7. Therefore, there is nothing you can do to defend this knight, and this knight here is completely safe because the queen and the bishop are defending. There is nothing better to do other than g6, we take the knight, bishop to g7, pawn takes, castles, and here in this situation, even though we have not checkmated our opponents, we are still in a completely winning game. Now, as promised, guys, this is the world's hardest chess puzzle. The situation is simple. It is white to move, checkmate in 2 moves. Let me know in the comments section if you know how to win this puzzle. I will also be posting the solution to this puzzle, which you can grab right here.